This wasn't a diss track. This wasn't a slick Instagram caption. This was the kind of moment that makes executives choke on their oat milk lattes. Because when 50 Cent decides to speak, it's never a whisper, it's a headline wrapped in gasoline. And this time, the name he dragged into the spotlight wasn't just Diddy, it was Diddy's mother. And footage so uncomfortable that Netflix allegedly said, absolutely not. Let that sink in. The platform that streams serial killers eating cereal and billion-dollar scandals like bedtime stories reportedly refused to air this. That's not censorship, that's fear with a budget. And when 50 Cent hinted at what didn't make the final cut, the internet didn't just react, it froze. Because if Netflix won't touch it, what exactly are we not supposed to see? This didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like a leak from the cutting room floor. The kind of secret that makes lawyers sweat and PR teams start drafting statements nobody will ever read. And 50? He didn't sound surprised. He sounded amused. Like someone who's been waiting for the world to catch up to what he already knows. This didn't arrive like a rumor floating through the blogs. It landed like a file sliding across a table in a locked room. When 50 Cent hinted that Netflix refused to air footage involving Diddy's mother, it didn't sound accidental. It sounded deliberate, like a reminder that some stories don't disappear, they get buried. And whenever 50 chooses his words carefully, it's usually because he knows exactly how loud the silence is going to be afterward. To understand why this hit so hard, you have to understand the history. 50 Cent and Diddy don't share a casual rivalry. This isn't social media sparring for attention. This is decades of industry politics, power moves, and quiet wars fought behind closed doors. When 50 speaks on Diddy, people don't hear a hater. They hear a veteran who's seen the machinery from the inside and isn't impressed by the paint job. Now add Netflix to the sentence. The same platform that turns scandal into serialized entertainment. The same company that streams true crime like background noise and packages controversy with glossy thumbnails. So when the claim becomes Netflix refused to air this, it flips the script, because refusal implies risk. It implies lawyers. It implies something that doesn't fit neatly into a bingable narrative without consequences. And then came the detail that made everyone sit up straighter, Diddy's mother. That's not a random inclusion. Parents are usually protected in public narratives. They're framed as supportive figures, background context, humanizing elements. Bringing a mother into a controversy signals that the story isn't just about one man's actions. It suggests roots, foundations, structures that predate fame and outlast headlines. 50 didn't describe the footage. He didn't summarize it, he didn't need to. He let implication do the heavy lifting. Because implication invites imagination, and imagination is far more powerful than confirmation. The internet immediately started filling in blanks, not because it had evidence, but because it had suspicion. People began asking uncomfortable questions. What kind of footage would make Netflix hesitate? Was it about family dynamics, power, influence, protection? Or was it something that complicated an already sensitive narrative in ways the platform didn't want to navigate? No answers appeared. But the absence of answers made the questions louder. The timing wasn't random either. Audiences are already skeptical of how stories get told. They've watched documentaries edit around inconvenient facts, soften edges, and focus on what's safe rather than what's complete. So when someone like 50 Cent points to something that didn't make the cut, it taps directly into that distrust. It confirms a feeling people already have, that not everything we're shown is everything that exists. Reaction was immediate and polarized. Some accused 50 of crossing a line, saying family should be off limits no matter the beef. Others argued that when power protects itself through institutions, exposing the ecosystem becomes fair game. The debate wasn't really about respect. It was about who controls the narrative when money and influence are involved. Old interviews resurfaced, past Diddy-related projects were re-examined. People started scanning documentaries, interviews, and specials with new eyes, wondering what scenes were trimmed, what voices were muted, and what context was conveniently absent. Suddenly, silence became suspicious. Editing choices became clues. Even what was shown felt different when people started thinking. about what might not have been. 50's tone added fuel to the fire. He wasn't outraged. He wasn't defensive. He sounded entertained. That's always the most unsettling version of him, because amusement suggests confidence. It suggests he knows more than he's saying and is comfortable letting the world catch up at its own pace. That calm delivery made the claim feel less like speculation and more like a breadcrumb. Netflix's lack of a public response didn't help. No confirmation, no denial, no clarification. In internet logic, corporate silence reads as legal caution, not innocence. People interpreted it as the company choosing to say nothing rather than risk saying too much. Whether that's true or not didn't matter. The perception stuck. Memes followed, as they always do. Jokes about lost footage, deleted episodes, and too wild for streaming spread across timelines. But underneath the humor was discomfort, because the joke wasn't funny on its own. It was funny because it hinted at something people weren't supposed to see. Supporters of 50 framed the moment as another example of him exposing industry hypocrisy. They argued that certain figures get protected, certain narratives get curated, and certain truths get deemed too complicated for mainstream audiences. Critics pushed back, saying vague claims without receipts only create confusion and damage. But even critics admitted the claim was specific enough to feel intentional. What made the situation heavier was how easily people believed it could be true, not because of proof, but because of precedent. The entertainment industry has a long history of sanitizing stories to protect brands, relationships, and investments. So when someone suggests a line was drawn behind the scenes, it doesn't sound impossible. It sounds familiar. As the first wave of reactions settled, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about footage. It was about control. About who decides which stories are safe enough to tell and which ones stay locked away. About how power doesn't always silence critics. Sometimes it just edits them out. By the end of this chapter, the claim had already done its work. It planted doubt. It shifted perception. It made audiences question the completeness of what they consume. And it reminded everyone watching that in an industry built on storytelling, the most dangerous stories are often the ones that never make it to screen. Once the phrase "Netflix refused to air it" entered the bloodstream of the internet, the story mutated instantly. It stopped being about a single comment and turned into a scavenger hunt for meaning. Because when a platform known for streaming chaos allegedly draws a line, people don't ask if there's a reason, they ask how bad the reason must be. And suddenly, everyone became a forensic editor, replaying old footage in their heads, searching for ghosts in the cuts. Reaction culture went feral. Clips of 50 Cent's past interviews resurfaced, not because they mentioned the footage directly, but because his tone now felt prophetic. People replayed his smirks, his pauses, the way he lets a sentence hang like a dare. Commentators broke down his delivery like it was a coded message. He knows something? He's baiting a response. He's telling us without telling us. The internet doesn't need subtitles when it's convinced there's a secret. Then came the think pieces, dressed up as context. Writers started connecting dots between media gatekeeping and celebrity power, pointing out how certain narratives glide through production, while others get quietly shelved. The conversation widened beyond Diddy and 50. It became about who gets protected by prestige platforms and who gets turned into content. Suddenly, Netflix wasn't just a streamer, it was a character in the story. Memes did what memes do best. They sharpened the suspicion with humor. Deleted scenes, jokes, director's cut never dropping. Too spicy for streaming. On the surface, it was funny. Underneath, it was discomfort wrapped in sarcasm. Because the punchline wasn't a joke, it was the idea that something real might exist, and we're not allowed to see it. Celebrity reactions, or the lack of them, poured gasoline on everything. People expected denial. They expected outrage. They expected someone to call cap loudly and publicly. Instead, they got quiet. Carefully measured quiet. And in internet logic, that kind of quiet doesn't feel accidental. It feels coached. It feels like meetings happened. It feels like phones were picked up and advice was given. Diddy's name trended alongside words like footage, Netflix, and mother, and that combination alone made people uneasy. Parents are typically framed as sacred ground in public narratives, the humanizing shield that softens a story. So when that shield is even suggested to be part of unseen material, the implications feel heavier. It hints at a backstory that complicates. The clean arc's audiences are used to consuming 0.50 cents supporters framed this phase as classic 50 chess. They argued he wasn't trying to expose everything at once. He was reminding people that exposure is selective. That if a platform decides something is too risky, it tells you more about the power structure than the footage itself. To them, the refusal was the receipt. Critics fired back, saying ambiguity without evidence is just noise in a louder package. They accused 50 of stirring the pot without serving the meal. But even they struggled with one uncomfortable truth. The claim didn't sound implausible. Not because of any confirmed detail, but because of how the industry works. Because of how often uncomfortable context gets trimmed in favor of a smoother story, the conversation spiraled into pop culture comparisons. People compared it to censored scenes in famous documentaries, to biographies that skip inconvenient chapters, to historical moments softened for mass consumption. Someone joked that the footage must be rated R for reputations. Another said it was too honest for algorithms. Jokes kept the momentum alive, but they also underlined a shared belief that something didn't make the cut for a reason. Then came the outrage cycle. Viewers accused platforms of protecting powerful figures. Others accused audiences of believing anything with a good hook. Both sides yelled past each other, but the engagement climbed. Every argument kept the story breathing. Every rebuttal kept it trending. This wasn't about facts anymore. It was about trust, and who the public trusts to tell the whole story. 50s. Continued restraint during this phase was surgical. No long explanations, no follow-up rants. Just enough presence to remind people he hadn't misspoken. That restraint made the speculation louder. Because when someone who usually enjoys chaos chooses not to elaborate, people assume there's a reason. Industry insiders, or at least people claiming to be, chimed in with vague statements about editorial decisions and legal considerations. Those words didn't calm anyone. They did the opposite. They validated the idea that risk assessments happen behind the scenes, and that risk often means exposure. As days passed, the story didn't collapse under its own weight. It consolidated. The claim became shorthand. That footage Netflix wouldn't air. It didn't need details anymore. It had become a symbol of gatekeeping, of selective storytelling, of power deciding what's acceptable for public consumption. What made this phase dangerous wasn't any single theory. It was the accumulation, the way multiple reasonable doubts stacked into a narrative that felt believable without being provable. That's the sweet spot for viral scandal. Not confirmed enough to resolve, not flimsy enough to dismiss. By the end of this stretch, one thing was undeniable. The conversation had moved far beyond whether the footage existed. It was now about why people believed it could be buried in the first place. And that belief alone reshaped how audiences viewed the platforms, the personalities, and the stories they consume. This wasn't escalation through revelation. It was escalation through implication. And implication, once it takes hold, doesn't fade quietly. It waits for the next spark, the next comment, the next leak, the next moment when someone decides to say a little too much. Eventually, the spectacle crossed an invisible line. The conversation stopped being about curiosity and turned into consequence. That's always the moment things get real. Because when a story refuses to die without proof, it starts reshaping reputations anyway. And by this stage, the idea that Netflix refused to air it had already done its damage. Quietly, efficiently, and permanently. For Diddy's public image, the fallout wasn't explosive. It was corrosive, the worst kind. Nothing concrete needed to be proven for doubt to take root. The mere suggestion that something involving his mother was deemed too risky for a major platform was enough to introduce a shadow that didn't belong there before. Every future documentary, interview, or retrospective suddenly felt incomplete. People didn't just watch anymore, they questioned what was missing. And once audiences start questioning the edit, trust erodes fast. This wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about perception. Diddy didn't need to respond for the damage to occur. Silence didn't look like confidence. It looked like insulation, like a system designed to absorb shock without cracking publicly. To supporters, that meant maturity. To skeptics, it meant protection. And perception, once split, never fully recombines. Netflix also took a quiet hit in credibility, whether deserved or not. The platform never confirmed anything, but the accusation alone forced people to reframe how they view truth on streaming services. Viewers began asking whether documentaries inform or curate, whether stories reveal or manage. And once that question enters the room, it doesn't leave. People started rewatching old content with suspicion. Scenes that once felt complete now felt edited for safety. Narratives that seemed bold suddenly looked selective. The platform became less of a neutral storyteller and more of a gatekeeper in the public imagination. That's a heavy role to inherit accidentally. 50 Cent, meanwhile, emerged exactly where he thrives, outside the blast radius, watching it all unfold. He didn't need to say more. The speculation worked for him. He positioned himself as the man willing to point at the curtain without pulling it back. That move kept him untouchable. If nothing was confirmed, nothing could be disproven. And yet the question lingered. Critics accused him of weaponizing ambiguity. Supporters called it strategy. Both were probably right. Because in modern media, implication often hits harder than revelation. A leak invites denial. A hint invites obsession. The real consequence landed in how normalized the suspicion became. Comment sections referenced the unseen footage casually, as if it were established fact. Reaction videos spoke about it like a known omission. That's how narratives cement themselves, not through proof, but through repetition. The more something is mentioned, the more real it feels. Industry conversations quietly shifted. Again, nothing public, nothing dramatic. Just a subtle recalibration. When powerful names get tied to unairable content, even hypothetically, risk assessments change. Doors don't slam shut. They open slower, with more caution, with more lawyers in the room. What made this phase especially unsettling was the lack of closure. No denial strong enough to end it. No footage leaked to confirm it, just a story stuck in limbo. And limbo is dangerous, because it invites imagination to finish the job facts won't. People debated ethics. Should family be off limits? Does exposure justify discomfort? Is refusing to air something responsible or complicit? None of those questions had answers, but they kept the story alive long after headlines moved on. The argument itself became part of the fallout. As weeks passed, the internet's attention drifted, as it always does. New scandals replaced old ones. New names trended. But this story didn't disappear. It settled into background noise. The kind that resurfaces every time the names involved come up again. A footnote that refuses to be erased, because unresolved narratives don't fade. They wait, and that's the lasting impact of this moment. Not a revelation, not a scandal, but a fracture in how stories are consumed. Audiences became more suspicious. Platforms became more scrutinized. And personalities involved became permanently linked to a question mark they didn't ask for. In celebrity culture, that's sometimes worse than an accusation. Because accusations can be addressed. Question marks linger. This wasn't the end of anything. It was a shift. A reminder that, in an industry built on storytelling, what isn't shown can be just as powerful as what is. And sometimes, the most explosive content is the content nobody ever gets to see. And this is why celebrity culture never sleeps. Because sometimes the loudest scandals are the ones you never actually see. One comment, one refusal. And suddenly, the entire internet is questioning what's real, what's curated, and what's been quietly swept off the cutting room floor. This wasn't just a bombshell. It was a reminder that power doesn't always silence stories. Sometimes it edits them. Now I want your take. Do you believe 50 Cent knows exactly what he's doing and dropped this hint on purpose? Was Netflix protecting itself, protecting a brand, or protecting someone else entirely? And be honest, if footage exists that was deemed too risky, do you think the public deserves to see it, or are some stories better left untouched? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because the comment section is where the real documentaries get made. And don't touch that like button politely. Smash it like it owes you money. Hit it like it just told you, we can't show you that. Every like tells the algorithm you want the raw stories, the uncut angles, and the narratives nobody wants to talk about out loud. If you're new here, subscribe right now, because this channel doesn't wait for permission to ask uncomfortable questions. Turn on notifications too, because stories like this don't end, they mutate. Today it's unseen footage, tomorrow it's leaked audio, next week it's misunderstood context, and statements that somehow explain nothing while saying everything. This is fame blueprint, where power gets questioned, silence gets decoded, and the truth is never as clean as the edit wants you to believe.